Today's story is Hatchet, and you'll find this on pages 120 through 131. So, a little bit about this story. This is an excerpt from a novel. So, you'll notice in this story, you'll read parts of the story and then they'll explain what happened in between. This is just to shorten it for you. So, we just have a piece of a story today. This is a fictional story told from the third person point of view. And this story is a little unusual in that you don't get the setting immediately. They explain the setting on page 122, and we find out it's set in a Canadian wilderness. So after Brian crashes, he comes out and he kind of looks around, and they explain that he sees a lake, and it's kind of where he is an eye shape, and he explains what he sees. So this is the setting of the story. And you'll see two main themes come out of this story. So the first theme is Brian seeing his life as good luck versus bad luck. So he sees his survival from the plane crash as good luck, but as he thinks about his life, he realizes that it's not all good luck, and he refers to the story of The Secret, and he sees that as bad luck. So, as believers, we understand that our life is not based on good luck or bad luck, but God is in control of everything. Okay, the second theme you'll see down on page 129, and this is transformation and self-reliance. So, as Brian sees a plane and the plane doesn't see him and the plane leaves, he starts to lose all his hope and he just despairs. He feels alone. He feels like they'll never come back, and he gets to the point where he wants to give up and die, right? And then he starts, after that experience, he starts to, as he says, become a new Brian, and he kind of believes in himself and relies on himself. So this idea of transformation. So again, as believers, we would realize that our strength wouldn't come from inside ourselves, but from God. All right, so a huge part of this story is conflict. So conflict is the struggle of the main character or group of characters against an opposing force. So external conflict is something that occurs outside of a character, and it can be man versus man. And a big part of conflict in this story is Brian versus his mother, or The Secret, right? So at the beginning of the story, they talk about The Secret. And so Brian is struggling with his mom and the idea of what his mom has done in this story. And then another huge part of the story is man versus a greater force, and in this case, it's nature, right? So Brian versus the porcupine. He's attacked by a porcupine and he has to survive that. He's struggling in the wilderness. He has to learn how to get himself food. And then, like I mentioned before, he sees all this as bad luck, right? So it's Brian versus bad luck, or fate, you could say. And then internal conflict. So this is something that occurs within a character, and it's Brian versus himself. So when he is struggling to survive, he gets to the point where he just wants to die. And this is like despair, right? He gives up. And then eventually he changes his mind and he wants to live, and he fights to survive. So the setting of the story really adds to the internal conflict. So he's in an extreme environment, an environment he's not used to, right? He's not good at surviving in the wilderness. He's a kid or a teenager, and he has no experience with these kinds of things. And so that's what leads him to this internal conflict, or this like struggling to not despair. Okay, so how does Brian respond to this conflict? So he is blaming all the bad things on bad luck, and the good things he's saying it's all good luck, right? So the secret, or the struggle with his mom, you can tell the way he describes it that he really loves his parents, but the secret, or his mom's affair, right? He saw her with in a car with another man that was not his dad. So because of that, his parents end up getting divorced, his dad moves away, and now that's why he's on this trip, right? He's going to visit his dad. So that whole thing kind of destroyed their family. So he kind of blames that on bad luck, and the reason he's in this whole mess is because of that, right? So he loves his parents, but he's really, really hurt by all the things that happened. And then as he's dealing with nature, he starts out, he's very fearful, he has no idea what he's doing, he's ignorant, but eventually he struggles and he becomes more courageous and he learns how to survive, right? And then the plane, he responds to the plane leaving by just giving up, right? And then eventually changes his mind and becomes stronger and fights to survive. Okay, so a godly response, just a way to look at this situation. For example, Proverbs 16:33 says, "The lot is cast into the lap, but every decision is from the Lord." And a lot is kind of like thinking of things as fate, right? So you can think about fate, but really every decision, everything that happens is from the Lord. And a good example of this is the story of Joseph, in Genesis 50. A lot of bad things happened in Joseph's life, but at the end of the bad things, you can see that God had allowed all those bad things to happen to put Joseph in a place where he could save his family and save his people. And so he said to his brothers who had hurt him, he said, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." So Joseph, looking back at all the bad things, could see that God had directed everything and had turned everything out for good. So that's the kind of thought process we need to have, is that God is in control of everything, and sometimes we can't understand it, but God will work everything out. Okay, a few literary terms I want to mention. First is flashback. So the story uses flashback to explain what happened with his mother. And so it starts out at the very beginning. It would be chapter 4 in the book, but the beginning of our story. It said the memory was like a knife cutting into him, slicing deep into him with hate, the secret. He had been riding his 10-speed with a friend named Terry. They had been taking a run on a bike trail and decided to come back a different way. Okay, so I'm just going to read a little bit of that, but you see, all the memories are very firmly in his mind, which is how you can tell that this really, really hurt him. It's like a picture in his mind, right? He'll never forget this. And it said the memory was like a knife cutting into him. So this is how much the secret hurt him. But they use a flashback to tell us what had happened and why all this story is happening. Okay, and you may notice in this story, the author uses a lot of what we call stylistic fragments, so incomplete sentences. For example, as they're talking about the secret, it says, then Brian looked over Terry's head and saw his mother, period, right? This is a fragment. It's not a complete sentence, but the author is using it for emphasis, okay? And then there's several examples of alliteration where the author uses the same consonant at the beginning of multiple words. And so, for example, on page 121, it says dreamless, deep, and down. So you can see the D, 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 and there's several examples of this. One big example of symbolism in this story is the hatchet. So the hatchet has a deeper meaning behind it. His mother gave him the hatchet, and think about a hatchet. It has as we could call it, two edges, right? It's sharp. And the hatchet, he uses the hatchet for survival, to protect himself, but he also uses the hatchet to provide food for himself, right? So two things. So the hatchet, you can think of his and his mother's relationship being cut, right? Because of what she did, their relationship has really been damaged. But also, she wants to find a way to repair the relationship. So there's two sides to that. Okay, that's all I want to say about this story, but the questions are a little bit difficult. So if you have any trouble, just let me know and I'll help you. Have a great day, guys.